The crimson dust of Viridia settled on Nelyra's shoulders as she trudged through what remained of the Astrian colony. Once a thriving settlement carved into the pink crystalline cliffs, it now stood as little more than shattered remnants, silent monuments to a war nobody wanted, but everyone participated in. Nelyra adjusted the sling across her chest, peering down at her infant daughter. Celine's usually iridescent skin had dulled to a pale blue, the natural luminescence that should have pulsed along her delicate facial ridges barely flickering now. The sight sent a fresh wave of despair through Nelyra's four-chambered heart. "Just a little longer, little light," she whispered, her voice hoarse from breathing the particle-heavy air. "Mother will find something for you." But she had been saying those same words for 3 cycles now, and the truth was becoming unbearable. Her body, weakened by malnourishment and stress, had stopped producing the luminous nectar that Astrian infants required. The protein synthesizers lay destroyed in the central square, victims of precise orbital strikes. The emergency ration caches had been raided, by survivors or scavengers. It no longer mattered. Celine squirmed weakly in the sling, making a soft chirping sound that would normally signal contentment but now seemed like a plea. Nelyra's secondary eyelids closed defensively against tears that would waste precious moisture. She had been a botanical engineer before the war, not a soldier. Her mate, Jorel, had been the warrior, but he had fallen in the first wave of attacks, defending the colony's perimeter while Nelyra and others escaped to the underground shelters. She still wore his medallion, a crescent-shaped talisman made from the shell of a Viridian sea creature, a reminder of everything lost. Night was approaching. The twin moons of Viridia rose over the eastern ridge, casting dual shadows that seemed to Nelyra like judgment from ancestral spirits. She found shelter in what had once been a communication hub, its domed ceiling now partially collapsed, exposing the violet sky above. Celine's breathing had become more labored, and Nelyra knew with aching certainty that without help, her daughter would not survive another night. She still had her personal communicator, a thin band around her wrist that had somehow survived the chaos. It had been standard issue for all colonists, primarily used for local communications and emergency signals. It wasn't designed for interstellar transmission, but the hub, despite its damage, might still have functional components. Desperation drove her fingers as she pried open panels, connecting her communicator to the hub's amplification system. She had watched the technicians do this during the early days of the war, before communications went dark. The connections were awkward, and twice she received painful shocks from exposed circuitry, but eventually, a weak pulse of light indicated a connection. "This is Nelyra of Asteria, survivor of Viridia colony." She spoke into the communicator, her accent making the standard galactic language sound musical despite her exhaustion. "My infant daughter is starving. I can no longer provide for her. If anyone can hear this, please. She has done nothing to deserve this end. Please help us." She repeated the message several times, each repetition making her feel more foolish. The hub's power was fading, and the likelihood of anyone friendly being close enough to receive the transmission was minimal. Most ships avoided the Viridian system now, marked as it was by conflict. Celine made another weak sound, and Nelyra disconnected her communicator, gathering her daughter close. She sang softly, an ancient Astrian lullaby about starlight finding lost children in the dark. As night deepened, she dozed fitfully, one hand always on Celine. She dreamed of Jorel, of his crystalline laughter, and the elaborate courtship dances they had performed beneath Viridia's auroras. In her dream, he was telling her something important, pointing to the sky with urgency, but she couldn't understand his words. Nelyra woke with a start. Something had changed in the air, a subtle vibration, a shift in pressure. Years of living on Viridia had attuned her to its rhythms, and this was foreign. Her primary eyes opened wide, the secondary ones focusing on movement detection. Above, through the collapsed section of the dome, a light moved across the night sky, too controlled to be a falling star, too small for a warship. Some kind of shuttle, perhaps. And it was descending. Fear and hope warred within her. No rescue had come when the colony fell. Why would anyone come now for a single distress call? It could be scavengers, or worse, human forces returning to ensure nothing of value remained. Humans. The very thought sent a shudder through her frame. The war had begun with diplomatic misunderstandings between humans and the Covalian Empire, but it had expanded, pulling in species and systems across 3 sectors. Asterians had been neutral initially, but that hadn't protected their colonies when strategic interests shifted. The light grew brighter, and now Nalyra could hear the distinctive whine of propulsion systems. Someone was definitely landing, and not far from her position. She gathered Celine and her meager belongings, preparing to move deeper into the ruins. But then her communicator pulsed unexpectedly, and a voice emerged from it, speaking the galactic standard language with a distinctly human accent. Astrian survivor, this is... There was a hesitation, as if the speaker was reluctant to identify himself. This is Tarek. I received your transmission. I have medical supplies and nutritional synthesizers. I can help your child. Nalyra froze, her breathing shallow. A human offering help? It had to be a trap. I am alone, the voice continued. I'm landing approximately half a kilometer east of your transmission point. I'll remain with my shuttle. Come if you wish. I will not search for you. The communication ended, leaving Nalyra in silence broken only by Celine's increasingly labored breathing. Kilometers away, Tarek powered down the shuttle's non-essential systems, his hands shaking slightly. He had deserted his post on Meridian Station, stolen a medical shuttle, and violated at least 12 regulations by responding to an alien distress call. If caught, the penalty would be severe, possibly execution, given the sensitive technologies aboard. He stared at the medical supplies he had hastily packed. Would they even work for an Astrian infant? His knowledge of xenobiology was limited to basic field medicine. But the desperation in that mother's voice had awakened something in him. Something he thought had died during the long, brutal months of this war. Tarek had joined the medical corps to help people. Somewhere along the way, that purpose had been buried under orders, prejudices, and the convenient dehumanization of the enemy. But an infant starving was the same in any language, any species. He prepared a small lamp and placed it outside the shuttle, a beacon in the darkness. Then he sat down to wait, wondering if the Astrian mother would come, or if this act of conscience would simply become the final, futile gesture of his military career. As dawn approached, painting Viridia's sky in shades of deep purple transitioning to amber, Tarek saw a movement at the edge of the clearing. A slender figure, clutching something to its chest, watching from the shadow of a crystalline formation. The Astrian mother had come. Tarek hadn't slept in 36 hours. His hands, usually steady during even the most delicate medical procedures, trembled slightly as he gathered supplies into a portable medkit. The shuttle's cramped interior was bathed in the soft blue emergency lighting. He'd cut main power to avoid detection by Meridian Station sensors. 3 days earlier, he had been chief medical officer aboard the orbital platform, treating human soldiers and occasionally prisoners of war. Now he was AWOL, a deserter, possibly a traitor. It had started during a routine shift in the medical bay. Tarek had been monitoring communications as he often did, a habit from his early days as a combat medic when information meant survival. The transmission had been faint, almost lost in background radiation. But once the station's AI enhanced and translated it, the desperation in the alien mother's voice had cut through him like a scalpel. My infant daughter is starving. I can no longer provide for her. Tarek had served through 5 years of this hellish conflict. He'd watched friends die, patched up soldiers who would return to the front only to come back in worse condition, or not at all. But something about this particular cry for help had broken through the protective numbness he'd cultivated. Perhaps it was because the message came from Viridia. He had been there during the initial bombardment, following orders, treating only human casualties while Astrian civilians died around them. The faces of those he'd been forced to ignore had haunted him since. Tarek checked the shuttle's sensors one last time. No pursuit yet. Meridian's commanders would realize soon enough that both he and the medical shuttle were missing, but bureaucracy might buy him some time. He'd disabled the shuttle's transponder and chosen a flight path that kept him in the shadow of Viridia's larger moon. The planet below was a study in contradiction, naturally beautiful with its rose-colored landscapes and crystalline formations, now scarred by the ugly marks of warfare. Impact craters pockmarked the northern hemisphere where the Astrian colonies had been concentrated. What the hell am I doing? He muttered, reviewing his limited knowledge of Astrian physiology on his datapad. Asterians were humanoid but with significant biological differences. Their cardiovascular system featured a 4-chambered heart that pumped copper-based blood, giving it a greenish tint. Their skin contained bioluminescent properties activated by emotional states. And their infants required nutrients that contained specific trace elements not found in human preparations. Tarek rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decision. His commanding officer, Admiral Vega, had made her position clear: non-interference with surviving alien populations until formal treaties were established. But the politicians had been arguing about treaties for months while people starved. The shuttle shuddered as it entered Viridia's atmosphere. Tarek gripped the controls, focusing on his landing coordinates. He traced the distress call to what had once been a major Astrian settlement. Now satellite imagery showed only ruins. As the shuttle broke through the cloud cover, the devastation became apparent even in the pre-dawn light. Crystalline structures lay shattered, their once proud spires reduced to jagged stumps. The Astrian architecture, which had once blended harmoniously with Viridia's natural formations, was now indistinguishable from the rubble. Tarek's throat tightened. He had seen the aftermath of battles before, but never returned to a site where he had participated in the destruction. His hands had healed, yes, but he had been part of the machine that caused this. Finding a clear landing area near the transmission's origin, he set the shuttle down with a gentle bump. The silence that followed was profound. No birds, no insects, none of the ambient sounds that should fill a living world. Now or never, he said to himself, activating his communicator to send a message to the Astrian mother. After transmitting, he waited, half expecting no response. Would she trust a human after everything that had happened? He wouldn't blame her if she remained hidden, watching from a distance until she was certain he posed no threat. But the life of her child hung in the balance, and Tarek knew that a parent's desperation transcended species differences. He placed a lamp outside as a beacon and prepared himself for the wait. On the other side of the devastated settlement, Nalaira clutched Celine closer as she debated the human's offer. Her people had legends about humans, stories that had evolved from cautionary tales to nightmares as the war progressed. They were described as relentless, cunning, and devoid of the empathic resonance that Asterians valued above all qualities. Yet this human claimed to have brought help specifically for her child. Celine stirred weakly in her arms, the bioluminescent patterns on her tiny face flickering dimly, a sign that her metabolic systems were failing. Without proper nutrition, her daughter would not survive another day. What choice did she have? Nalaira gathered her courage and what little strength remained. She followed the direction of the shuttle's landing, moving silently through the ruins that had once been her home. Every step was a battle between maternal instinct driving her forward and cultural fear pulling her back. As she approached the landing site, she caught sight of the shuttle, smaller than a military transport, marked with symbols she recognized from captured human medical facilities. A solitary figure sat outside, occasionally checking what appeared to be a medical kit. Nalaira observed him from behind a fractured crystal formation. He wore no helmet, exposing features that were both familiar and alien. Similar body structure to her own people, but with strange, flat skin lacking the natural luminescence of Asterians. His hair was cropped short, and even in the dim light, she could see the fatigue etched in his posture. He looked up suddenly, as if sensing her presence, and their eyes met across the clearing. Nalaira's secondary eyelids flickered nervously, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she stepped forward slowly, cradling Celine protectively. "I received your message," she said in carefully practiced galactic standard. "You said you could help my daughter." The human, Tarek, he had called himself, stood up slowly, hands visible and empty. "I can try," he replied, his voice softer than she had expected. "I have nutritional supplements that might be adapted for her needs." Nalaira hesitated at the edge of the clearing. "Why would you help us? Your kind brought this destruction." Tarek's expression tightened. "Not all of us wanted this war. Some of us just couldn't stop it." He gestured toward Celine. "May I see her? I need to understand her condition to help." It was the moment of truth. Trust this human with her daughter's life, or watch her die with certainty. Nalaira stepped forward. The dawn light of Viridia cast long shadows across the clearing as Nalaira approached Tarek, each step deliberate and tense. She stopped just beyond arm's reach, her iridescent eyes, both primary and secondary sets, fixed warily on the human. "Before I allow you near my child," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion, "you must understand something. Celine is all that remains of my family, my bloodline. If your intention is deception." Her free hand moved to the ceremonial dagger at her waist, a gesture Tarek didn't miss. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm a medic, not a soldier. My oath is to heal." "Your people's oaths mean little here," Nalaira replied. but she loosened her grip on the weapon. Tarek nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. Then judge me by my actions, not my species. He knelt slowly, opening his medical kit on the ground between them, a universal gesture of non-aggression. The motion exposed the back of his neck, a vulnerable position that was not lost on Nalaira. Perhaps he knew enough about Astrian culture to recognize the significance of such a posture. May I approach? He asked, looking up at her. Nalaira hesitated, then nodded once, unwrapping the protective layers around Celine to expose her frail form. The infant's normally vibrant skin was dull, the bioluminescent patterns across her face and arms pulsing weakly with each labored breath. Tarek moved forward carefully, every movement telegraphed. He withdrew a small scanning device from his kit, holding it up for Nalaira to see before activating it. This will help me understand her biological needs, he explained. It's non-invasive. As the scanner hummed softly, passing over Celine's tiny form, Tarek's professional demeanor faltered. The infant was in worse condition than he had expected: severe malnutrition, metabolic imbalance, early organ stress. His medical training instantly calculated odds of survival, and they weren't good. But he had seen children overcome worse. Human children, yes, but the will to live transcended species. She needs immediate nutrition, he said, putting the scanner down. Her system is lacking several critical compounds. I have broad-spectrum supplements, but they're formulated for humans. I'll need to modify them. Nalaira watched him intently. How? The scanner analyzed her current biochemistry. I can use that data to calibrate the supplements. He reached for his kit again, then hesitated. I need your help. My knowledge of Astrian physiology is limited. What would she normally consume at this age? Something shifted in Nalaira's expression, a flicker of surprise, perhaps at being consulted rather than dictated to. She would take nectar, she said after a moment, a secretion produced by the maternal glands. It contains proteins, carbohydrates, and trace minerals from the mother's diet. As Celine grew, solid foods would be introduced gradually. Tarek nodded, processing this information. And your body has stopped producing this nectar? Nalaira's secondary eyelids closed briefly, an expression of grief or shame. Tarek couldn't tell which. Yes, the stress, lack of proper nutrition. My body conserves what little energy remains. Then we need to create a substitute. Tarek turned to his portable synthesizer, inputting data from the scanner. This will take some time. Meanwhile, she needs hydration. He prepared a solution of electrolytes and glucose, modified based on the scanner's readings. This should be safe for her. It won't provide complete nutrition, but it will help stabilize her until we can synthesize something more substantial. Nalaira accepted the small vial he offered, her fingers brushing against his momentarily. The contact seemed to startle them both, a tangible reminder of their differences and the improbable nature of their cooperation. With careful movements, she administered the solution to Celine, who initially resisted but then swallowed reflexively. Nalaira watched anxiously for any adverse reaction, but after several moments, the infant's breathing seemed to ease slightly. It's helping, she whispered, relief evident in her voice. Tarek allowed himself a small smile. It's temporary, but it gives us time. As he worked on calibrating the synthesizer, a stilted silence fell between them, broken only by the soft sounds of Celine and the mechanical hum of his equipment. Finally, Nalaira spoke. You said your name is Tarek. I am Nalaira. Nalaira, he repeated, trying to match the musical cadence of her pronunciation. And your daughter is Celine. She nodded. Named for the luminous path our third moon casts across the night waters. A pause. Did you come alone? Are there others? Just me, Tarek confirmed. Against orders, actually. This caught Nalaira's attention. You defied your commanders to answer my call? Yes. Why? Tarek's hands stilled over the synthesizer. It was a question he had asked himself repeatedly since hearing her transmission. Because. He began, then shook his head. Because 5 years ago, I watched a city burn from orbit and did nothing. Because I've spent too long following orders I knew were wrong. Because your daughter deserves to live, regardless of what flag flies over this planet. He looked up to find Nalaira studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if her multifaceted eyes could see past his skin to the guilt beneath. You were here, she said softly, during the initial attack. It wasn't a question, but Tarek nodded anyway. On a medical frigate. We were told to prioritize human casualties. I complied. The admission tasted bitter. And now you seek redemption through my child? The accusation stung precisely because it contained a kernel of truth. Maybe, he acknowledged. Or maybe I'm just tired of watching children die when I have the means to prevent it. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Nalira's posture relaxed fractionally. Then we have that in common, human. The synthesizer chimed, indicating completion of its first batch of modified nutrients. Tarek tested the solution carefully before offering it to Nalira. This should be closer to what her body needs, he explained. It contains proteins and minerals similar to your natural nectar, based on the scan. We'll need to monitor how she responds and adjust accordingly. As Nalira administered the solution to Celine, Tarek took the opportunity to scan their surroundings. The ruined settlement offered little shelter, and they were exposed here beside his shuttle. We should move inside, he suggested. The shuttle has environmental controls. It would be better for Celine. Nalira hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of entering a confined space with a human against the benefits for her child. Before she could respond, a distant sound caught their attention, the distinctive whine of approaching aircraft. Tarek's body tensed. Patrol drones, he said grimly. Meridian must have noticed my absence. Fear flashed across Nalira's features, her skin momentarily brightening with alarm, an involuntary Asterian response. They will find us. Not if we move now. Tarek quickly gathered his equipment. The shuttle has basic cloaking technology. It can mask our presence, but only if we're inside. The sound grew louder. Nalira looked down at Celine, who had already shown slight improvement from the nutrients, then back at Tarek. Decision made, she nodded. Lead the way, human.